Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started as more people come in. This is You Speak, What Young Climate Justice Leaders Need Now. And thank you for joining us the day after the election on what is an uncertain day for the United States and likely around the world. We understand you may be processing a lot of different emotions and be in different stages of processing, and we appreciate your time here today and your interest in climate justice, specifically in uplifting the youth doing this important and urgent work. I'm Dr. Alison Stine. I'm the Climate Justice Senior Editor at MPQ, and I'm joined today by Yasmina Benslimane, Senowa Mize-Fox, and Gabby Treadwell. We will begin with a conversation. It will last about 60 minutes, well, a little less than that, because we do have a space for questions and answers at the end. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A function of the webinar, and we will get to them at the end. Please put comments in the chat box throughout. At the end of the webinar, we will have a survey for you as well, and we are also recording this, and the recording will probably be available on our website next week. So all of our panelists today are writers for our recent fall 2024 nonprofit quarterly magazine, which is themed, as it is every fall, around climate justice. Our specific theme this year is supporting the youth climate justice movement. And today we're going to have a conversation with these writers and leaders about their work, their hope for the future, and what they need from us. So the first thing I'm going to ask our panelists is I'm going to ask if you could each briefly introduce yourself and talk about the work that you do. And I will pick on someone. Senowa, would you like to start?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I know that folks are holding a lot today, so sending just a lot of hugs and care wherever you are, wherever your head's at. My name is Senowa Mize-Fox. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, which is a philanthropic serving organization slash movement support organization. I've been there for 3 years as the movement engagement manager for climate justice. And my role is to be the bridge between funders and movement folks. But I'm always accountable to movement folks. I come from movement, and I help organize funders essentially into moving more money to the front lines. So I'll keep it short, but happy to answer questions. Check.
My name is Gabby Treadwell. I'm a horticulture student at the College of Western Idaho. I am a community organizer, a learner, a listener. Currently, I've been tasked with creating programs that are essentially focused on filling knowledge gaps regarding nature. My organization serves exclusively Black, queer, and trans folks in Idaho. Our goal is to build confidence within folks to essentially navigate and understand outdoor spaces at their foundation and ultimately achieve diversified outdoor spaces. Essentially, the goal of my org in general, though, is to support the needs of our Black, queer, and trans community in Idaho. Idaho actively legislates against and devalues the lives of Black and trans people, so the scope of our work is pretty crucial. Our marginalized communities have been through a lot, so it's important for us to consider joy when crafting our programs, and I think we do incredible work when we teach ourselves about our environment and climate justice from a lens of joy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yasmina. I'm originally from Morocco. I'm based in Puerto Rico. I've been living in the US for the past 6 years now. And I'm the founder of Politics for Her, which is an organization that advocates for the inclusive participation and representation of young women and girls, particularly from the global majority in decision-making process, in politics and leadership. So as you can imagine, today is a really depressing and dark day for us. So I'm sending all of my love and solidarity And when it comes to climate justice, Politics for Her, we launched the Rising Horizons program, which focused on empowering young women and girls in climate justice and gender equality. So what is the intersection and mentorship, capacity building. And back in March, I also co-founded and launched Climate Sirens, which is a social enterprise that focuses on uplifting the voices of women from the Senowa region, Southwest Asia and North Africa, and particularly focusing on the colonial and indigenous approaches to climate justice. So we're really trying to foster spaces where young women and young people in all their diversity can lead, influence, and bring fresh perspectives in today's present reality and urgent challenge that is the climate crisis.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here from your various places, and thank you for your work. So the next question I want to know is, how did you come to write your piece for MPQ's fall issue supporting the youth climate justice movement? And why? Why did you write it? And Gabby, I'm going to ask you to start because you have a pretty interesting story about writing.
Yeah. So this was my first submission to a magazine ever. And I mean, I'm really new to the community organizing world. I've been in it for about 2 years, but this was passed on to me from the executive director of my organization. And I was super energized about like the concept of telling a story and experience that I feel like I'm living and kind of navigating right now. I was taking a summer school class. It was like an interior and floral design class. And I have this classmate who has all this experience as a freelance writer. And I was like kind of talking to her and I was like, I'm so stuck in this realm of where you have all these things to say, but you don't know where to start. And she was just telling me that the most important thing is to just like write what I want to say and not what I think people want me to say, which sounds silly. But like in academia, I'm so conditioned to be like writing essays to get A's. And I'm looking at this like rubric to make sure all of my language is matching. And it's just, you know, it's very transactional. So it was a challenge to write a story. But I've been really reflecting on like the power of storytelling and how stories connect us and often liberate us. And I wanted to consider stories in my own life that could resonate to the larger climate justice story. And I really wanted to access like the larger narrative in which these common themes are kind of arising of like value and sensitivity and honesty. And I just think a lot of that is what's like driving a lot of our different work, but we're really connected through all of these concepts. So yeah, I was inspired by everybody and myself at the same time. So yeah.
I love that. And I think that's so important, right? What you want, not what you think people want from you. That's very good to keep in mind, I think, for all of our work right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think vulnerability is a huge tool in the work that we do. And I think that we're also at the same time seeing vulnerability be weaponized. And I think that we need to be really conscious about the concepts of vulnerability and how that arises and how we tell our stories.
One of my friends who's an artist said this morning something along the lines of, I won't be ashamed for feeling hope and having felt hope. And I think that's really important for the climate work as well. Yasmina, how about you? Can you talk about your piece and how you came to write it?
Yeah, so I'm part of the Young Climate Leaders of Color cohorts of the People's Climate Innovation Center. So they're the one who actually sent the call. And as soon as I saw it, I did not hesitate because I take any opportunity to amplify the voices of young women and girls I work with truly at the grassroots level that are not only the most impacted by the climate crisis, but they're also active participants at the front line. So to really shift away from this narrative of seeing young women and girls from global majority countries, from Africa, from the Senowa region, as seeing them as helpless or victims, because they're not. Their efforts are very often overlooked. And let's be honest, when it comes to the climate justice movement, it's truly led by young people and even more by young people of color. So when we think about these young women that face unique challenges in their communities, we also know that they bring truly innovative solutions and approaches that are unique to the context and to the timeline in which we are. So by writing this piece, I really wanted to amplify their voices, of course, not speak on behalf of them, to showcase their resilience. And sometimes I don't like to use the word resilience because unfortunately they don't have another choice but being resilient, and also help them, like, help people to the readers to get a better understanding of how climate justice looks like in different parts of the world, and most importantly, the intersections when it comes to colonialism, when it comes to capitalism, consumerism, and of course, gender and forced migration, which are still overlooked and not yet spoken about enough, how the climate crisis affects different intersections and different groups of people and communities at a different level and pace, and how the global majority takes the burden of many Western countries, of huge corporations. So really understand that if we want an inclusive climate movement, then it's about transnational solidarity. It's about bringing these issues that are abroad or far away issues, but making them also part of the agenda. Because only if we build this truly transnational movements within this space, then we'll be able to enable real systemic change.
Absolutely. No choice but resilience. That's an incredible, incredible statement. Senowa, how about you?
Sure. Yeah, I first want to give a shout out to Dana at Justice Funders for recommending that I write this piece. I feel like I'm in my early 30s, like I'm aging out of what the international definition of youth is. And I was reflecting on how I came into climate justice, environmental justice, and kind of my pathway there. And I kept landing on my time spent in the Amazon rainforest. When I was 10 was the first time I went to the Amazon. I was in fourth grade, and my science teacher, Mrs. Mason, won a grant to take 4 students to the Amazon, fourth and fifth graders. And we had to write a letter to her about why it was important to conserve the rainforest. And, I, anyone who knows me knows I have kind of hippie parents who are delightful. And so I've always been composting and recycling and being out in nature and all of those things. I grew up in that world. But I think going to Peru the first time really shifted something in me, but I didn't know what because I was 10. And I spent a week in the rainforest. I befriended a capybara. I think I wrote that in the article. That was one of my favorite parts. I love capybaras. But I didn't really know what it all meant until probably I was 21, and I got the opportunity to study abroad again in Brazil this time, actually in Belém, Brazil, which is where COP30 is going to be, Conference of Parties for the UN next year, which I think, oops, sorry, my headphones, which I think is incredible. And, I being in Brazil the second time, being in the Amazon, spending 4 weeks there, and seeing the deep connections that folks on the ground had with the ecosystems that make up the Amazon rainforest was deeply inspiring and moving. And I think it, like, something clicked into place, right? Like, we got to, I did Amazon resource management and human ecology. And so we got to go all over the Amazon, and we got to see how people were treating this land, and in deeply unjust ways, and also deeply connected and liberated ways at the same time. And seeing that juxtaposition of indigenous peoples, traditional peoples who have been living off the land for centuries, this is their land, and the exploitation that is happening from agribusiness, from logging, from cattle ranching, all sorts of things. At the same time, like, these two realities exist, And then zooming out and seeing even further than that, how Western backed like not like NGOs and heads of state are looking at the Amazon as like the lungs of the world, as this something that's deeply crucial in our fight for against the climate crisis, but they aren't seeing the people on the ground, right? It becomes about the bottom line. It becomes about making these really big pledges without actually having an understanding of like the deep rooted connections that people have to these places, right? And how that is what is going to preserve and conserve the rainforest, not this like money making extractive process, right? And so I think that really inspired me, like kind of looking ahead to COP30 and what's at stake, right? And we haven't even had COP29 yet, but just being in that space and learning more and becoming further radicalized after that is kind of what inspired me to write.
That kind of leads into a follow-up to my next question, which is, all of you, what has your path been to becoming a leader? Some of you touched upon your interest in the environment and the earth and your home, and specifically, how that connected you and called to you. But how did you first become involved in the fight for climate justice? Gabby, would you like to start?
For sure. I was just thinking about this question. I've been reflecting on it a lot, and it's really difficult for me to answer, but I think essentially that it's really difficult to be studying something like horticulture and not be involved in climate justice. I mean, you're studying plants, you're studying how plants are manufactured. We learn all about documented labor and what migrant farm workers go through. I mean, it's just really hard to not care, like horticulture is not created in this vacuum. And I think that plants interconnect us all, and they have a really profound way of radicalizing us if we let them. And I think that something really big for me that's really just made me recognize, the ecological disablement that we're facing is just like growing my own food and paying attention to what's happening in my own backyard. And our first annual frost and used to be October 10th, and it was 60 degrees on my birthday, which is October 27th. So, my annual plants in my backyard just died this morning. So I think that if you're paying attention at all, you can see it. And I don't think that I intended to study horticulture to be a community organizer, but it was just so difficult not to. It was just like this immediate tug, and I still knew that I have so much horticulture to learn, and I have incredible professors. I want to shout out two of them. Casey O'Leary, a huge mentor of mine, who's been an urban farmer and seed saver in Boise for a long time. She founded Snake River Seeds. And my other professor, Sierra Laverty, Idaho plant doctor, an incredible entomologist and a fierce protector of the land. They've embedded it in us. It's just part of our curriculum. It's who we are. They're like, if you're going to be a horticulturist, you're going to be a land steward, and you're going to have to care about these things. And that was really what solidified, like, this is going to be part of my career, and I'm going to make money caring about the planet and, teaching people to care too. And that was not something that I imagined, like pursuing horticulture. I thought, oh, I'm gonna like work in this greenhouse, or I'm gonna have my own farm, and like that's where it's gonna end. But I realized, yes, like I probably will have my own farm, but it's gonna be 10,000 more things than that, and I'll be profoundly connected to people through so many other ways. So yeah, just kind of stumbled into it, to be honest. It chose me more than I chose it. It was just like, this is kind of what you're doing. This is your purpose. This is your role. So.
And that's so true. How climate justice really bleeds into every single area of our lives on this planet. If you're going to be blank, you're going to have to worry about the climate, or you're going to have to be involved in some way, because it's involved with you, right? It's involved with you. Other panelists, what has your path been to leadership, to working specifically in the climate justice movement?
I can.
Go ahead.
um, oh, I know. I feel like I always like get into the next question accidentally at the previous question. I have a tendency.
Oh, it's helpful. It's helpful. It's like guiding you on the
My
path.
own segue. I think just while the Amazon definitely planted a seed in me, it wasn't that simple. It wasn't as though I came back and was like, okay, I'm doing climate justice now. I'm an organizer now automatically, right? That didn't happen. The path was definitely not linear. I went to graduate school after college, University of Manchester in the UK, and I studied international sustainable development, which I learned was an oxymoron after being in college or being in graduate school. And I had these incredible professors who really leaned into thinking critically about development, its purpose, for who, and how it's tied into neocolonialism and extractivism and white saviorism. And I I think combining my experience being in the Amazon and then being in graduate school, and like it's like this thing clicked where I was like, oh, this is not like doing this to care about your bottom line or to try and um move communities into a box that makes sense for you, that makes you comfortable, um, is not the way, right? um, so I came back from graduate school. I am a millennial. And so we were taught that you have a master's degree, you're automatically going to get a really well paying job with benefits. That didn't happen. I started working at a food co op in Burlington, Vermont called City Market. It was a member co op. And it was unionized, and I started union organizing. And they're like, you have a background in climate? Cool, we're going to start sending you to these conferences. And that's where I met a lot of climate justice, environmental justice organizers. I learned about the deep and complicated history between the environmental justice, climate justice, and labor movements that's still happening today. Right? I recognize like what it meant to do place-based organizing, right? Like having come from I thought I was always going to do international organizing. I learned how to do international solidarity organizing, right? And so, what does it mean to be rooted in your place, rooted in your community, and also having transnational, international solidarity and co conspiratorship on the ground, right? I learned what it meant to make $19,000 a year and I basically have two full-time jobs. Like once as an organizer, once is working at a food co-op, and how deeply that affected me and my own communities, and the power of organizing to build a world that is better than this one, right? Is more habitable for everyone, right? And that I think really resonates for me, especially today. And that's I think what gives me hope in this moment. I also do have hope. I am pragmatic, but I have some optimism in that like we can organize together to build this future that we want, right? Even as we are trying to adapt to this crisis. And so I think that I have learned from so many elders and youth, right? Like people who are younger than me that are coming up with these really amazing ideas. And I think that has helped me become a better climate justice leader. So, yeah.
And that's really interesting to bring that up because I realize we have three generations represented here. We have millennials, we have Gen Z, and I am Gen X. And so we have like our generation building here, which leads perfectly into our next question. Before I ask it, though, I do want to remind our audience members, if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to write them in that Q&A function there at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to them at the end. But my question related to generations actually was, what do you wish other young people, perhaps youth who are not yet involved, maybe your generation, maybe the kids coming up after you, what do you wish that they knew about climate justice and the movement for climate justice?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and something that popped up for me was just that perfection is not the end game. Climate activists, land stewards, outdoor enthusiasts, like we all understand that nature has been severely altered and damaged as a consequence to our actions of as a species through colonialism, imperialism, genocide, war, all of these things. We understand that that's what we're facing. This is so true, overwhelming, and so hard. But climate justice is essentially just about forming this alliance to do our best. And I think that that's really important. I also think that like our capitalist world really intentionally exhausts and exacerbates us. And it's really hard sometimes to find sustainable ways to organize and to care. And it's really important to consider rest and thinking about ways in which you can sustainably approach issues that you're passionate about. Lastly, I just want to say to focus on the science and who is pioneering like incredible research regarding these catastrophes that we have created for ourselves and for other marginalized communities, because we really need to be focusing our energy and amplifying these people that know their communities and that understand their problems and are really working towards those solutions. I think that we are all really connected through climate justice and this concept of climate change, but we at the same time know our communities best and the health of our communities and what our communities like need.
Absolutely. Yasmina, do you want to go next?
Yes, sure. I'll cover first the question before, since I was not able to answer yet. But I would say that for me, it comes from both the lived experience and the expertise. So I was raised by the ocean in Morocco, and I would go fishing every morning, and I would see throughout the years the biodiversity loss. And since then, I developed a really strong attachment to all living being and creatures. So I stopped eating red meat really young, which was so taboo back in Morocco, because most of our traditional meals are made with tons of meat, and and we also have the Eid, the celebration once a year where they sacrifice the sheep. So that too, I was against. So I would say that since I was a child, I deeply cared about anything related to the environment and climate. And of course, like in school and college, they teach you about it, but it's a very superficial kind of teaching where they teach you about the polar bears and the ice melting, but they don't tell you the deep root causes of the climate crisis, whether it be colonialism and extractive systems or the fossil fuel industry. So this is something that you learn through your work as an organizer, but also when you want to decolonize your mind. So I started also seeing from an academic level the interconnectedness of the climate crisis with forced displacement. I have a master's degree in forced migration, and I focused on how disasters and climate change lead to either forced mobility or immobility. My first master's was in international law, so I also focused on what are the legal systems that protect us when it comes to the climate crisis, and seeing how all of these systems affect disproportionately young women and girls in particular made me want to really focus on this intersection. And of course, living in Puerto Rico, an island at high risk of disasters, and seeing how the intersection of colonialism, since it's a US colony and the energy is monopolized by a Ford corporation here, it's not even under our control. So seeing all of these different things and the settler colonialism and how the US Navy bombed Vieques for 60 years, and I snorkeled with turtles who had big tumors. I spoke to residents who had cancer, the highest rates of cancer in all of Puerto Rico and the Caribbean at large. So seeing this and how it affects everyday life and everyday people made me realize that truly, like, no one is immune to it. And also through my engagement in high-level spaces at the United Nations, I've seen the exclusion of voices from the global majority and even more of young women and girls. So that's also where Climate Sirens was launched, to truly truly decolonize the climate justice movement. Because as it grows, especially in the West, a lot of resources stay in the West and they don't move towards the global majority, which is more impacted, yet less responsible. So I also think that as young people, it's not our fault. We're inheriting from something that we didn't create, but it's our responsibility at the end of the day. And every young person has the power to make a difference. So I want them to realize that when it comes to the climate crisis, it's also a social justice crisis. As an intersectional feminist, it is a feminist issue, and so other underlying issues. It's not just about environmental science, it's tied to migration, human rights, economic justice. You spoke about labor, that too. So you know, you don't need to be an expert. Your lived experience can also be enough to amplify the voices of your communities, your voice, your activism. You have a unique perspective and a unique lived experience. You don't need multiple degrees to be able to speak on the issue, because climate justice needs storytellers, artists, organizers, thinkers that think outside of the box. So there's a place for everyone, and every single contribution can truly make a difference. So that's what I would want to tell young people to organize now more than ever. The previous Trump administration rolled back on over 100 policies related to climate. As someone that lives in Puerto Rico, I'm really worried about our future and our present and the way that it's going to unfold. So we need young people mobilizing now more than ever.
You know, and your point about you don't need a master's degree, you don't need any degree, you don't need to be old enough to have a degree. You know, help is help, and we need everyone to pitch in the way they can. That's such an important part. Senowa, how about you?
Yeah. Ooh, yeah, thank you, Yasmina. That was beautiful. I think, today something that I would like to tell folks is like that you have power, right? Kind of resonating with what Yasmina and Gabby are saying is that you're right. You do not need the master's degree. As someone who has a master's, you don't need it. Your lived experience is incredibly important. And I think that's something that's really been underlying. I've seen a lot of people, even prior to the election, who are just grieving and burnt out and having a really hard time in movement spaces. And, we are taught that we have to fight and we have to tear down these systems, and we do, but we also have to build, right? We can't burn it all down without having a plan to build. And I think that's something that youth are incredibly aware of. I've been so inspired by people younger than me, a little bit older than me, who are creating these new possibilities. And especially as someone who has moved from like movement organizing to funder organizing, what's really amazing is seeing like young folks from movement who are creating these new possibilities to resource their organizations, right? Like, what does it look like to build your own endowment? What does it look like to have community controlled capital so that you can be resourced for the long haul, right? And I think that is something that I love to remind young folks is, and even me and myself, is to step into your own power, right? Like, do the scary thing and also do the kind thing for yourself and take rest. Truly, rest is important. It's not just resting when we are leaderful, it is resting on that pathway to leadership as well. I think that is like one of the most crucial lessons that I have learned, because we cannot keep building if we are burnt out. So yeah, I would definitely, I'll leave it there.
We can't keep building if we are burnt out. That's burnout is an issue that affects us across all sectors, but I think, it's been interesting in my work as a climate justice editor. I've been seeing burnout in children, in like 10-year-olds, and 8-year-olds, and that they are shouldering that is so difficult to reckon with. So kind of the other spectrum of this question is my next question. What do you wish the people who are not technically youth? I love your phrase, Senowa, aging out of youth. I guess we're all aging out of youth, but what do you wish those adults, especially maybe older adults, people in other generations, understood about the youth movement for climate justice? Yes, Yasmina, would you like to start?
Yes, for sure. I would like them to understand that when it comes to the climate crisis, it's not in a distant future. It's a present reality. It's a present threat. It's not something that is going to come eventually, and it's hitting actually everyone the same. So we shouldn't be the one that have to bear the brunt and prepare for the future impacts. This has to be an intergenerational partnership and dialogue. This has to be in a way that young people are seen as experts, not just as tokens, and to be truly like heard, listened to have active listening. And we're already experiencing the consequences of climate change. And I think that Senowa spoke so well about the climate anxiety that is around it. And on top of that, you have the burnout that comes from working on such heavy topics. And we're not leading because we necessarily want to, but we don't really have a choice because it's our future that we want to preserve. And we're not going to inherit a sustainable future at this point in time. So it's an urgent necessity. So there needs to be this dialogue, the listening and respecting our insights as young people that inherit from this world in chaos. We also need to be seen as equal partners, and there needs to be funding. And the funding needs to be flexible, core, sustainable. It cannot be a few $1,000s thrown away and say, okay, go do something with that. We need to be able to do our work in a way that is meaningful to us, in a way that allows us to thrive. And at the end of the day, this is a capitalistic world. And without resources, we're not necessarily able to really drive meaningful change. And I think we've seen this too with the election, because there's been a lot of oligarchy. At the end of the day, it's the people that have the money, the resources that hold the power. And that's what we're seeing. It's all about resources and money. So we need to shift and move these resources away from corporations, away from fossil fuels, and invest in us. Last COP, they had a few $1 million commitment to the loss and damage fund. We don't need a few $1 million. We need billions of dollars in terms of commitment. So that's where we need the older generation to come and bridge together. Will be stronger. We cannot work in silos and be fragmented. This needs to be an intergenerational effort. We need to take urgent action, and that means that adults need to step up because their generation has ruined the current state of the world, and they need to support youth-led initiative and not sideline them and not perceive them as, oh, they're just young, they don't know what they're talking about. We are experts, and we don't need to have multiple degrees to do so. We have the lived experience. We work with the communities that are directly affected. So this is our expertise. So listen to us, invest in us, don't tokenize us, and do this in a meaningful way for a sustainable future for all of us. That's what I would tell them.
I keep meaning to write quotes in the chat of things you all are saying, but there's so many beautiful, meaningful, wonderful things that I cannot type fast enough. So I'm looking forward to the recording where we can get some of these quotes from you. Gabby, how about you? What do you wish older adults understood? What do you need from them in the climate justice movement for youth?
Something I think I wish adults understood is how different our generations are raised to think about the planet. But at the same time, I think that a lot of our ancestors and organizers that existed before us laid vital groundwork for us to get where we are in the climate justice movement. So alone, you're already part of it. So might as well like step it up a little bit because you already laid this groundwork. Here's where we're at. Like the fight's not over. So don't stop now. At the same time, I think that like what's going on in a lot of like rural states and states that have like a lot of open land, we need to be paying attention to this land loss and why people are selling several hundred to 1,000 acres of land to be developed. That's not sustainable. And that biodiversity loss and changing that little farmland that we have into subdivisions is not going to work. So if you are a landowner with lots of land, please consider land trusts. Please consider giving your land back to Indigenous communities. please consider protecting your land. We need empty land. We need open land. We need people to be thinking about not selling their land, but how they're going to protect it, because that's kind of the habitat that we're looking at for animals, for humans. Like, we need to be thinking about things like that at the same time of what can we do as communities, but what can I do as an individual that has wealth, that has real estate, that has all these things? How can I protect these assets and give them back to this planet that, like, I mean, essentially, as we're living, I mean, there's no ethical consumption under this system. So, I mean, our existence alone is exploitative. So what can we do to give something back? How can we leave this world just a little bit better than we found it, you know? Sorry, it makes me so emotional. Yeah. I will stop there.
Senowa?
Oh, thank you, Gabby. I think, I mean, there are a lot of things, right? Like the climate crisis is deeply, deeply ingrained, not only societally, culturally, materially, but even in the way that people think about what does it mean to have solutions to the climate crisis, right? I think that we are now in this period of time where there is an urgency here, right? There is an urgency. The climate crisis is actively affecting people every single day, right? It's 80 degrees here in Baltimore. I am wearing a tank top, and that's just like one small aspect of what's happening. And I think that when there's this urgency, right? And especially when older folks see this urgency, it's like, oh my God, okay, we need to do something big and scalable and innovative, and let's like move fast and break things, and let's throw some venture capital money behind it. Let's like throw philanthropy behind it. Let's experiment. And I'm not saying that experimenting is bad, right? Like, we definitely need to try some new things. But a lot of these innovative, move fast and break things, Silicon Valley bird solutions are a false solution, is our false choice. And I think I want adults, especially adults in positions of power, whether it's heads of state, philanthropy, executive directors of nonprofits, to recognize that new isn't always the best thing. That the people with the lived experience that have been trying these solutions for decades and know that they work are the people that are moving this forward. We are in a period of adaptation, right? There's less and less mitigation every day that we are able to do for this crisis. And that is the reality. And that is where there is an urgency. But urgency does not mean throwing money behind things that are not proven to work, that the science says cannot be scaled, right? I have seen solutions or false solutions, everything from like literally building a parachute big enough to envelop the sun, or doing deep sea mining and disrupting an ecosystem that we barely know anything about. Instead, instead of putting resources to communities who have a relationship with the land, who know how to speak the language of the land. And that is something that I find incredibly infuriating. And so I would say that just because it's shiny and new doesn't mean that it's effective, right? And I think if we are being resourced as people on the front lines to fight against false solutions instead of trying to build this world where we can live in harmony with these ecosystems, with nature, then that's a problem, right? That is a problem. And so I think for adults who have been in this for a long time, I know it's really easy to get stuck in what you know, but please trust that young people and elders who have been on the front lines for a long time know what they're talking about. and they need to be resourced and in a way that levels the playing field because we've been under-resourced for so long. And I like need people to hear that. Check.
You know, that relates to one of the questions we've received from the audience, which, by the way, if you have questions for our participants, please try to write them in that Q&A function there at the bottom. That way they don't get lost in the chat, and we're going to go through as many as we can. But one of the questions was kind of related to what we're talking about. How do elders or older adults get in the way sometimes, or how do they hinder the climate justice movement, even inadvertently? Are there things they're doing that are hindering the movement?
From my personal perspective, in terms of where I live, I would say sitting on assets and not using them. If you have 40 acres of land, why are you not leasing that out to a small first-gen farmer? That alone, that is climate justice. That's giving somebody access to land to farm, to bring in biodiversity into our community that they historically wouldn't have been able to access. So I would say think about the things that you have creatively and how can you use them. Talk to young people, communicate, and just, it's not that you necessarily need to reinvent the wheelhouse, but there are people who have reinvented the wheelhouse and who are thinking about these things differently. And I think that just facilitating those conversations is really important. And start with things that, you know, you enjoy. And I think that the things that are really hard about climate change naturally become later because you're already motivated, you're already inspired, you already have this like place that you're empathizing, which is such a very intelligent way to show up and organize from a place of empathy. And I think that once you access that and can find a way to relate to your ecosystem around you and to our climate, I think that that's a really good start. And I think that people would be really surprised the doors and the possibilities that open just from that notion alone. And I really encourage people to just start thinking and asking questions and click on articles you normally wouldn't click on that are about the planet, and listen to podcasts and just explore. Just, I encourage people to just be curious and just try and amplify and listen. And maybe you don't have anything to say and maybe there isn't a response, and that's okay too. But I think that at least trying to learn, I think that there is some form of reparation there, because we are not responsible for the defamation of this planet and we are fixing it. So at least trying to learn and understand and undo why you shouldn't be throwing trash out of your car onto the highway is a huge start. Yes, of like, wow, we didn't treat our planet well in our generation. And like this generation beneath us is doing so much better. And yeah, our lived experience, we know what we're talking about. We do. So I think that that's really significant.
Anything else anyone wants to add to that question? I know you kind of answered it a bit already.
I would like to add, because I also saw a question about having a youth council without tokenization. So throughout my work, I've seen so much tokenization, which means that young people were used as tokens to make the organization, the corporation, whatever it is, look good. The first thing to know is that when you engage with young people, don't engage in any form of unpaid labor. When you're a climate justice activist, when you're a feminist activist, the resources are already scarce. And no, exposure is not a form of payment. You want to engage with young people, you're going to treat them the way that you're going to treat whatever celebrity that you use to greenwash your event, you're going to compensate them. The second thing is that you're really going to treat them as equal partners and listen to them as experts again, and don't put yourself on a higher pedestal because you're older. So ageism is also very often an issue because young people are younger. They are seen as having less expertise or whatnot. But like we mentioned, we have the lived experience. And sometimes we even have the degrees. Not that it matters that much, but still. So we really need like bold transformative actions, not just empty promises, because that's why young people are getting very sometimes hopeless in our, I don't even want to call them leaders, but people in power, because I don't see them as leaders. The people in power, they just give empty promises and they don't actually contribute with actions. So the words and the actions don't match. So maybe they should look at themselves in a mirror and hold themselves accountable for failing on their empty promises year after year after year after year. So we're tired of that. And also, it's really amplifying the underrepresented communities. So if you want to be a true ally, you're going to be intersectional. You're going to include the LGBT folks, the indigenous communities, the people from the global majority, those that are really affected by the climate crisis, and those that are bearing the brunt and saving us from that. And like Gabby said, it starts with we don't have the individual responsibility, but it does start with individual actions. So start to learn first. I know that even if all of us in the world turn vegan, zero waste, it's not going to stop the climate crisis because it's much deeper than that. So that goes along with decolonize your mind. Learn how the climate crisis is related to extractive systems, colonialism, from Puerto Rico to Africa, from everywhere. Congo right now is facing one of the worst humanitarian crises, and this is to fuel our smartphones, our vapes that we consume on a daily basis. So learn about these things. Where are your products, the things that you use on a daily, sourced from? So it's also about us having this decolonial and feminist approach that focuses on equity, not just equality, and just to support young people in the sense that amplify their stories and give them space and make room. If you've been leading for so many decades and we see only old white folks leading our countries for generations, there's an issue. At some point, the leaders need to step down. They need to realize that the time has passed, that we need fresh energy and fresh perspective. So make room for others. Stop monopolizing the power, because eventually we're gonna want to take that power. We need it. We deserve it.
And Yasmina, we have a question specifically for you if you want to take it. This is from a participant who says, my family is from Puerto Rico, and while I dreamed of moving back, Puerto Rico is increasingly hit with climate catastrophe after catastrophe without independence or support from the US. So they're curious how you show up in Puerto Rico as a climate leader. What was it like for you joining this already active, deeply rooted community there, climate justice community there? And what parallels might you see between Puerto Rican climate justice and other global majority spaces, if you feel comfortable taking?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, like, it's seeing the impacts of the colonial status of Puerto Rico, which is not an independent, it's called the Commonwealth or whatever name they want to give it. It's a colony. There's no other name to define it better. And seeing that everything that gets imported, even when it comes to food, has to go through the US. So there are huge issues of food insecurity here. But Puerto Ricans have been mobilizing and relying more and more on sustainable practices, farming. So it's starting to get there, but it's met with a lot of resistance, because at the end of the day, everything, the food, even the vegetables, the fruits, even the tropical ones that you think would be everywhere in Puerto Rico, they get imported from Mexico or the US or the Dominican Republic, and it just doesn't make any sense. But this is the way that the US gets hegemony. I also learned about the history of Puerto Rico, and there's a lot of similarities with Morocco itself, because we were colonized by Spain as well. So I see that a lot. And what we're seeing now, and it's an international and interconnected struggle, is the issue of settler colonialism. And I know that Gabby touched upon land, owning land. More and more Puerto Ricans are getting displaced because of tax invasion. People come, move here, they do Airbnb, businesses, tourism, prices get higher, indigenous local communities get gentrified. So this is something we're seeing in Mexico, in Indonesia, with the surge of also digital nomad visas. So it's also, again, about decolonizing our minds and realizing that as a simple act of moving to a place without making the effort to connect with the culture, the history, and the current context can really harm the local population. So, like, at the end of the day, Puerto Rico is at high risks of disasters. We're hit by hurricanes, tropical storm. We always have electricity issues because it's owned by a corporation, Luma, that is US Canadian. So that's also a crazy aspect of it. Sometimes we don't have electricity for days and we don't know when it will come back. But this is the way this is also like part of the climate crisis. And most importantly, there's no support from mainland, from the US federal government. It's the community that sustained themselves. Even after Hurricane Maria, it's the community that mobilizes and that supports one another to truly show that they do not need support or to rely on anyone else but themselves.
So we have a lot of really great questions. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left. As I was telling my panelists, I hope that they will continue to write for our site and that you will see a lot more of them. You can also read their incredibly moving articles and essays in our fall issue. But I did want to try to end on a positive note if we can. We did have a question that said, I know it's really hard today. Can you share any stories of local action that defined how your community resists and builds towards the just climate future we all deserve? Any examples of work you're doing on the ground in your communities that is moving towards the future we need?
It's definitely a hard, it is a hard question today, but I think that something in my own taking off my NCRP hat for a second, not that organizing philanthropy is very important, but also in terms of being on the ground, I live in Baltimore, Maryland, which is a historically Black city, right? Like over 60% Black folks, a lot of folks, low income, displaced. It is a place that on the outside is really struggling, but internally in communities, like Baltimore is a city of neighborhoods, is a city of communities. And I think that there was an example a few years ago of some youth from a local high school actually stopped an incinerator from being built in a marginalized neighborhood on the water. And it was what it took was all of these teenagers essentially saying, this isn't right, right? Like teenagers knowing that what they were about to breathe in, what they're breathing in from an existing incinerator that also exists in Baltimore, is not the air that they should be breathing. And I think that, trying to keep it short, but they fought and won. And there is no second incinerator there now. And that is one of the most like beautiful things that I try to remind myself of in these darker times, is making sure that like always understanding that youth have that power. They have the power to bring down an incinerator and replace it with what they want in their neighborhoods.
Well, I think we have a lot more to say, but we're going to have to close out on that note. Bringing down an incinerator, that's a powerful start. If you'd like to join us in the future, on November 14th, you can learn about collaborative budgeting. And on November 20th, we have a premium webinar about liberating finance to build a more just world as part of our Remaking the Economy series. We really appreciate your time and your work, our panelists and our participants. Please keep doing this work. Thank you to our panelists today for their words, for their writing, and for their bravery. Please support their work and their organizations. Everyone that registered today will receive an email of the resources we discussed today, including the organizations that our panelists work for and how you can reach out to them and help them. Thank you again, and please, please take care of each other and the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye.